Hello everyone. Welcome back to Midnight Murmurs. Tonight we step into the dark heart of the wilderness, where the crackle of a campfire and the whisper of the wind can mask something far more sinister. These are true camping horror stories, accounts that begin with laughter under the stars, but end with something unexplainable lurking just beyond the trees. From forgotten trails in the Appalachians, to shadowed rivers in the Pacific Northwest, and even the Black Hills where campers swear they were never truly alone, these stories are not campfire legends. They come from testimonies buried in ranger reports, whispered confessions from survivors, and fragments of truth pulled from places that were never meant to be revisited. But the question that haunts every story is this: what follows you back when the forest should have let you go? That mystery will remain until the very end. Wherever you are, watching alone in your room, or listening quietly from a cabin far from city lights, be warned, you're not as alone as you think. If you are new here, subscribe to Midnight Murmurs for daily true horror content they never wanted you to uncover. And tell me in the comments, would you dare camp in a place like this? I'd always told myself I wanted to try camping alone. Not with friends, not at a family site filled with music and barbecue smoke, but truly alone. Just me, the forest, and the kind of silence you can't find anywhere else. That was the excuse I gave people anyway. The truth was darker. I wanted to know if I could handle it, if I could face the kind of stillness that strips away every distraction and leaves only the sound of your own breathing. I drove deep into the woods that weekend, far enough that the park signs turned from polished metal into sun-faded wood, far enough that my radio died in a storm of static. My gear was light: a two-person dome tent, a sleeping bag, a cooler with enough food for 2 nights, and my phone, though I knew reception would vanish the deeper I went. By the time I found the clearing, the sun was low and the trees were burning with orange firelight. I pitched my tent in silence, half proud, half nervous, and built a small campfire that seemed to flicker against the weight of the woods pressing in. The forest was too quiet. No rustle of insects, no frogs croaking from some hidden pond. Just the pop of burning wood and the occasional sigh of branches overhead. I tried to relax. I listened to a podcast until my phone warned me of battery drain, then shut it off and stared at the flames. By 11, the fire was dying, and the air had grown colder. I climbed into the tent, zipped myself into the bag, and lay still, letting the silence bleed into my ears. Sleep came, but it was shallow, restless, and then, at exactly 3 a.m., I woke to a sound that didn't belong. It was faint at first, a tiny click like a tooth of metal sliding against another. I thought I was dreaming until I heard it again, longer this time. A slow rasp, nylon shifting. The zipper. Every muscle in my body stiffened. I told myself it had to be the wind, but there was no wind. The air outside was dead calm, and the sound wasn't random, wasn't fluttering. It was steady, measured. The zipper was moving. I turned my head toward the tent flap, my eyes wide in the dark. My ears strained, counting the slow teeth parting. 1, 2, 3, each motion deliberate, as though someone was crouched just outside, sliding the pull tab down in increments. It stopped halfway. The opening now hovered beside my face, the fabric sagging slightly inward. My breath hitched, loud in the stillness. I waited for a hand, a shadow, something to push through. Nothing came. For a full minute, maybe longer, the zipper stayed still. The air charged with a presence I couldn't see but could feel. Patient, waiting. And then, slowly, the sound reversed. The teeth closed again. Not quickly, not in retreat, but with the same careful patience, as though whatever was out there had decided not to come in. Not tonight. The forest swallowed the silence again. I stayed, awake until the faint glow of morning touched the fabric walls. My hand shook as I pushed the flap open and crawled out into the cool dawn air. That's when I saw them. Prints. Deep, damp, pressed into the mud around the tent. Not boots, not bare feet. Too long, too narrow. Toes that stretched forward like claws dragging. I told myself it had to be an animal, but in my gut I knew better. Something had tested the zipper. Something had stood outside my tent at 3 a.m., inches from my face. And whatever it wasn't finished with me yet. Morning light did little to calm me. The prints outside the tent were impossible to ignore. I crouched down, running a hand along the damp edges. The impressions were too deep for a raccoon or fox, too long and narrow for a deer. Something had stood there, close, upright, watching. I packed my things hastily, but when I reached the car and slid into the driver's seat, I couldn't turn the key. My own stubbornness pressed against my fear. I'd told everyone I wanted to prove I could camp alone. Leaving after one night felt like admitting weakness, like letting fear win. So I stayed. The day passed in uneasy silence. I wandered a trail that wound toward a ridge, hoping the hike would clear my head. But the forest wasn't right. Along the path I found small, unsettling signs. A tuft of coarse, dark hair caught, in bark. Piles of stones arranged in careful spirals. Bits of burnt wood stacked neatly as if someone or something had been building tiny ritual fires. By dusk, the sky turned violet. My fire flickered weakly, a fragile bubble of light in the encroaching dark. The woods felt alive with eyes. I ate in silence, every crunch of food sounding too loud, too revealing. When the fire shrank to embers, I forced myself into the tent. I zipped it tight, tugging the metal pull down until it caught at the bottom. For a while, only silence. Then came the first tap, soft, rhythmic, against the nylon. I froze, holding my breath. Another tap, then another, circling the tent slowly, like fingertips drumming in thought. My flashlight trembled in my hand. I flicked it on and shone it through the thin fabric. For a moment, the beam caught something tall gliding between the trees. It moved unnaturally fast, long-limbed, and then vanished. The tapping stopped. I lay, there heart-pounding, trying to convince myself it was gone. Minutes stretched into hours. Then the sound came again, not tapping this time. The zipper, a single, deliberate tug. Then another, then another. 3 quick motions like someone or something counting. I couldn't take it. My hand moved on, its own pinching the zipper from inside and pulling just enough to make a narrow slit. I pressed my eye to the gap, desperate and terrified to see what waited. At first, nothing. Just the night, the silhouettes of trees swaying. Then, directly in front of me, something shifted. A figure. Tall. Too close. Its outline blocked the stars. I couldn't make out its face, only the sense of it leaning in, listening, breathing. And then, silence. A silence so heavy it pressed into my chest like a weight. I slid the zipper shut with shaking hands, curled into the sleeping bag, and didn't move again until morning light seeped in. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. I was leaving. The woods had stopped feeling like woods. They felt like a trap, like every tree was part of something watching me, waiting for me to fail. I shoved my gear into the pack, my hands trembling so badly I dropped my stove twice. When I reached the car, I thought I was safe. I slipped the key into the ignition and twisted. Nothing. A hollow click. I popped the hood, though I knew nothing about engines. The sight made my stomach turn. The wires had been chewed through. Not cut, not frayed, gnawed, as if teeth had worried at them all night. There would be no leaving. I spent the day pretending to prepare, building the fire higher, setting my flashlight batteries in a neat row, trying to convince myself I had control. But as the sky sank into bruised purple, I felt the same truth pressing in. I was being hunted. The forest waited. When the clock on my phone struck 3 a.m., the zipper stirred, a faint tick, then a slow slide. I'd tied bells to the cord, a desperate trick, but they never rang. Instead, the pull moved as if guided by a hand that knew how to avoid the trap. The nylon shifted and I heard it, breathing, slow, measured, right on the other side of the thin fabric wall. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The zipper inched down, then stopped. A pause. Then it went up again. Down. Up. Like someone testing me. Like someone playing. I clenched my fists and waited for it to end. Eventually, the sound faded, but I didn't sleep. At dawn, I found something worse than footprints. Inside my tent, laid neatly at the foot of my sleeping bag, were 3 small stones in a row. I hadn't put them there. When I finally escaped days later, after flagging down a distant hiker and being towed out, the forest felt like it let me go. But the nightmare didn't. Weeks passed. Back home, in my apartment miles from any woods, I thought I was safe. Until one night when I scrolled through my phone and saw a video file I didn't remember recording. It was dark, shaky, the lens pointed at my tent flap. The zipper glinted faintly, and then something leaned in. A pale face, blurred but close enough that I could see its mouth form my name. I dropped the phone. I haven't camped alone since. But sometimes in the middle of the night I wake to a sound in my apartment, a faint, deliberate zip, and I know it's not finished with me. We weren't supposed to find it. The fire tower sat hidden among the pines like the skeleton of something ancient. Its metal frame rusted orange, its cabin at the top leaning as though the forest had been trying to swallow it for years. We came across it by accident following a faint deer trail that wandered too far from the main campsite. "Dude, this is perfect," Josh said, grinning wide as he tossed his backpack to the ground. "How many people can say they camped at a haunted fire tower?" I froze at that word, haunted. Earlier that morning, at a greasy diner on the edge of town, I'd overheard the locals whispering about the tower. They hadn't noticed me listening, or maybe they had and didn't care. They said nobody stayed near it after dark, that people heard screams from the top, or saw figures climbing the stairs when the whole place was supposed to be empty. I'd laughed it off then, but standing beneath its shadow, the air heavy and silent, my skin prickled. "No," I said firmly, "not here. Let's go back to the lake." That's when the others laughed. "Come on, man, don't be such a buzzkill," Sarah teased, brushing her hair back with a smirk. "You scared?" Josh added, eyes glinting. "Yeah," I admitted before I could stop myself. That only made them laugh harder. By the time the sun set, the fire was crackling at the base of the tower. The orange glow made the twisted metal seem alive, every shadow stretching long and jagged into the woods. The tower loomed above us, swaying slightly though the night air was perfectly still. I couldn't take my eyes off it. We told stories, roasted marshmallows, tried to pretend it was just another night in the woods. But as the fire died low, I felt the forest growing colder, quieter. Even the bugs had gone silent at some point. Exhaustion dragged me into sleep. I woke to a sound that turned my blood to ice, a metallic creak. It came again, slow, heavy, deliberate. The sound of weight shifting against rusted stairs. Something, or someone, was climbing the fire tower. I grabbed my flashlight, fumbling with the zipper of my sleeping bag, but before I could shine it, the noise stopped. The night went dead silent. I looked up, heart hammering, breath clouding in the cold air. The top cabin loomed above, its broken windows nothing but black squares against the stars. And in that blackness, for the briefest second, I thought I saw movement, a figure passing by the window, but when I blinked, it was gone. The morning came gray and heavy, the kind of light that makes everything look washed out and sickly. None of us had slept well, though most of my friends pretended otherwise. Josh cracked jokes as he boiled coffee over the fire. Sarah tried to hum some song under her breath, but I caught them glancing at the tower when they thought I wasn't looking. No one mentioned the noises from the night before. By mid-afternoon, curiosity got the better of them. "Let's climb it," Josh said suddenly, slinging his pack over one shoulder. His grin was wide, but his eyes were tired. "We can't camp here and not check it out." Every bone in my body screamed no, but when Sarah and the others followed him, I couldn't be the only one left at the bottom. So I went too. The first step groaned like something alive. Rust crumbled beneath our boots as we climbed the spiral of metal stairs. Higher and higher, the forest shrank below us, the trees closing ranks like soldiers. My grip on the railing was slick with sweat. By the time we reached the top, my legs were shaking. The cabin loomed ahead, its wooden door barely hanging on its hinges. Josh shoved it open with a laugh that cracked halfway out of his throat. Inside, the air was colder. Much colder. The windows were shattered, glass glittering like frost across the warped floorboards. Every wall was covered in graffiti, names, dates, crude drawings. But beneath it all, carved deep into the wood, were strange markings. Circles, jagged lines, symbols that seemed older than the tower itself. "What the hell?" Sarah muttered, running her hand over one of them. "Probably just kids trying to freak people out," Josh said quickly. Too quickly. But when I leaned closer, I saw something that made my stomach clench. The grooves weren't shallow. They were deep, gouged into the wood as if made by something with claws rather than a knife. We didn't stay long. When we climbed back down, the sun was already dipping, the shadows stretching across the clearing like black rivers. No one spoke as we lit the fire, the tower looming above us like it was listening. That night, the noises came back. It started with a soft metallic groan, the kind of sound the wind might make, except the air was still. Then came the footsteps, slow, heavy, measured, clang, clank, clank. Something was climbing the tower again. We froze by the fire, staring up at the skeletal frame. "Hello?" Josh called, his voice breaking. No answer. Only the sound of the footsteps. Higher and higher until they reached the top cabin. We held our breath. Then, behind the broken glass of the highest window, a shadow moved. Not ours. Not human, it was too tall, too thin. Its limbs stretched wrong, bending in ways that made my chest tighten with something deeper than fear. The fire cracked. Sarah let out a whimper, and for the first time since we'd found the tower, no one laughed. No one slept the second night. The fire burned low, every ember struggling against the weight of the dark. The tower above us groaned, metal joints screaming as though it carried the weight of something massive we couldn't see. Every time I looked up, I saw the shadow in the top cabin. It didn't move, didn't pace, didn't waver, it only watched. By dawn, we were wrecked. Pale faces, dry mouths, eyes wide and hollow from staring at the dark too long. "We're leaving," Sarah said. Her voice shook, but the decision was made. We packed in silence, shouldered our gear, and set off down the trail we had come from. My chest loosened with every step we took away from that cursed tower. But less than an hour later, the clearing opened again in front of us. The fire tower loomed. We froze. Josh cursed under his breath. Sarah dropped her pack. The others looked like they were going to be sick. We tried again. A different trail. A different direction. We walked for hours until our legs throbbed, until our throats ached from thirst. But every turn, every path, every attempt ended the same. The tower. Always the tower. By the third time, panic set in. That night, the shadow moved closer. It pressed itself against the window, filling the broken glass with its stretched form. Josh swore he heard his own voice calling from the top. Sarah claimed she saw someone climbing down toward us, though the stairs remained empty. Then Mark was gone. One moment he was by the fire, hands shaking, eyes darting. The next he stood up, walked into the tree line without a word, and disappeared. We shouted for him until our throats bled. The forest swallowed every sound. The fire sputtered and died. One by one, my friends left, pulled into the woods, following voices only they could hear, until the clearing was empty. Only I remained. The tower loomed over me, its frame shuddering, the metal stairs rattling, though no one climbed them. And then I looked up. The cabin window wasn't empty anymore. It was filled, every inch of it, with shadows. Dozens of them, thin, elongated, packed together like they were pressing against the glass to get out. They weren't waiting for us. They were waiting for me. It started with a rumor. Deadwater Creek wasn't on any map I owned. Not in guidebooks, not in ranger logs, not even in the forums where backpackers shared GPS coordinates of every hidden trail. It was spoken about in fragments and whispers traded at bars and gas stations, a place you stumbled upon by accident and regretted forever. When I first mentioned it to the old man at the supply shop, his hands froze mid-count over the fishing hooks. He didn't look at me when he said, "You don't want to camp there. Why not?" I asked. His voice dropped lower like he didn't want anyone else to hear. "The water keeps what it takes." That was all he'd say. Later, at a diner near the highway, I brought it up again. The waitress, a woman with sunburned skin and sharp eyes, stiffened. "People don't come back," she said simply. "Sometimes we find their cars. sometimes their gear, but never them. I laughed nervously, waiting for her to add some explanation, some rational twist. She didn't. She only shook her head, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked away. The more I asked, the colder the responses became. A gas station attendant muttered about hearing voices along the creek. A local hunter swore his dogs refused to drink from it, snapping and howling until he dragged them away. No one could tell me exactly what was wrong. Only that Deadwater Creek was a place where the forest stopped behaving like the forest, and that was enough to hook me. I should have listened. The hike was harder than expected. The trail markers vanished a few miles in, leaving me to bushwhack through undergrowth that clung to my legs like it wanted to keep me out. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no insects, no movement at all. Just the crunch of my boots and the ragged sound of my own breathing. The air grew damp and heavy, carrying a smell I can only describe as stagnant. Like a pond that hadn't moved in years, thick with rot beneath the surface. The scent got stronger with every step. By the time I heard running water, my nerves were already frayed. The creek appeared suddenly, like the trees had parted for it. Wide, still. Its surface didn't ripple, even where the current should have been strongest. It was like glass, a black mirror cutting through the forest floor. Something about it was wrong. The trees along its banks leaned away instead of toward it. No moss grew near the waterline. Even the dirt looked pale, drained, but I was stubborn. I'd come too far to turn back. I found a small clearing near the bend of the creek and set up camp. Tent, fire pit, gear stashed neatly. That night, as I sat by the flames, the silence pressed in. It wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating, like a blanket laid across the world. And then I realized the creek wasn't silent. It was whispering. Faint. Too faint to catch words. Like a dozen voices murmuring just below the surface, mouths full of water, speaking in unison. I told myself it was the wind, the current, my imagination. But when I leaned closer, straining to hear, the fire popped behind me. I turned. Nothing. When I looked back, the surface of the creek had changed. It wasn't reflecting me anymore, it was showing someone else. At first I thought it was a trick of the firelight, shadows distorting my face, bending my reflection into something unfamiliar. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became. The person in the water wasn't me. Their features were close, almost identical, but wrong in ways too subtle to dismiss. The mouth hung slightly open, jaw slack as though in mid-scream. The eyes were wider, unblinking, glistening black instead of catching the firelight. And the worst part? When I raised my hand, my reflection didn't. It lagged, half a second behind, watching me before deciding to mimic the motion. I stumbled back, my boot crunching against the fire pit stones. My heart hammered in my ears. The creek lay still, unbroken, but the figure staring up at me didn't vanish. That night, sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, the sound of the water whispered at the edges of my hearing. Faint words twisted inside the current, slipping in and out of sense. Stay. Below. Join. When dawn finally painted the forest in gray light, I crawled out of the tent, desperate for distraction. The air reeked stronger than before. Damp. Metallic. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it all. That exhaustion and nerves had made me see what wasn't there. But the forest had changed. Dead fish littered the bank in clusters, their bellies white, their eyes milky. Insects swarmed in frantic clouds above them, buzzing in a frenzy like they couldn't escape. And further down the creek, I found it. A deer. Its body lay half submerged, twisted unnaturally. Something had hollowed it out, ribs gaping like a cage snapped open, its eyes gone. Nothing left but black sockets filled with water that trickled slowly back into the current. My stomach lurched. I stumbled away, gagging, but the smell clung to me, seeped into my skin. By evening, the forest felt alive in a way it shouldn't. Every twig snapped behind me. Every rustle of leaves sent my pulse racing. When I looked over my shoulder, I swore I saw movement along the creek, shadows slipping beneath the surface, shapes drifting just out of sight. As night fell, the whispers grew louder. They no longer murmured, they spoke, my name. The first time I heard it, I thought I was losing my mind. But then it came again, clearer, bubbling up from the black water in a chorus of voices. I crouched near the edge, trembling, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The water shifted, rippling in perfect circles, though no wind touched it. And then my reflection smiled at me. I didn't. The figure in the creek grinned, mouth stretching wider and wider, until the skin at its cheeks split into black tears. The whispers surged into laughter. And I knew Deadwater Creek wasn't just watching me. It was waiting. The third night began with silence. Not the heavy, suffocating quiet of before, but something deeper. A pause, as though the whole forest were holding its breath. Even the whispers beneath the creek were gone. That absence unsettled me more than their presence ever had. I sat by the fire, watching the water's surface. It looked wrong. Too smooth, too dark. The kind of black that seemed to swallow the world around it. I wanted to pack my things and run into the woods, but a part of me felt trapped, as though leaving would only draw its attention harder. The air shifted. Cold, damp, thick. Then the creek began to rise. At first it was subtle, lapping gently over the banks like a tide. But within minutes, water surged unnaturally fast, flooding into my campsite. The ground softened beneath my boots. My fire hissed and died. My tent collapsed under the weight of sudden mud, and the creek didn't stop. Shapes swam just beneath the surface, pressing close as if a thin film separated us. Faces, pale and distorted, drifted upward. Eyes wide, mouths moving in screams that made no sound. Men, women, children, their bodies writhed like they were trapped behind glass. I recognized their expressions from the missing person posters I'd seen pinned to gas station corkboards. I staggered back, whispering, "No." No, then I saw myself. My own face floated among them, eyes rolled back, mouth gaping. It pressed against the surface, hands clawing from inside the water, desperate to break free. I turned to run, yet the reflection on the creek didn't vanish. Instead, it pulled itself upward. Water sloughed off its body as it climbed into the world. Its skin dripped like liquid, melting and reforming a parody of flesh. Its eyes were not mine. They were bottomless, black pits filled with the depth of the creek itself. Its grin split too wide. Too hungry, it stood where I stood, only inches away, watching me with hunger. "Stay," it whispered in a chorus of voices that weren't my own. I bolted. Branches whipped my face as I plunged into the forest, heart hammering, lungs searing. Behind me, the ground sloshed with wet footsteps. The whispers followed, swelling into a tide that filled the trees. Every shadow stretched too long. Every gust of wind carried laughter. I didn't stop until I saw the faint glow of a highway through the trees. By the time I stumbled onto the asphalt, gasping, mud-streaked, and wild-eyed, the whispers had faded. The road was empty. The forest stood still behind me, but even from that distance I could see the reflection of water shimmering in the corner of my vision. I never went back for my gear. Never told anyone the full truth. But I can't escape it either. When I wash my hands, when I look into puddles, when I glance at a mirror in dim light, sometimes my reflection lags, and sometimes it smiles, because no one really leaves Deadwater Creek. The forest was alive that first day, buzzing with the familiar comforts of camping trips I thought we'd left behind in childhood. My brother Nathan walked ahead of me, his old army pack bouncing on his shoulders, humming a song we used to make fun of our dad for singing on long drives. The trail wound deeper into the woods, the air thick with pine and damp earth, sunlight breaking through in fractured shafts. "Just like old times," Nathan called back, grinning. I laughed and nodded, though part of me already felt uneasy. Maybe it was just how isolated the place was. We had chosen a spot miles from any ranger station, a clearing marked only by a faint X on Nathan's crumpled map. He said that's what made it real camping. By nightfall, we had pitched the tent, built a modest fire, and cracked open a couple beers. The air grew still, colder than I expected for late summer. I remember commenting that the woods sounded quiet. Too quiet. No crickets, no owls, just silence pressing in from all sides. Nathan shrugged it off, but even he stopped humming. It was just past midnight when he unzipped the tent. "Gotta piss," he muttered, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the trees, then disappeared as he moved deeper into the dark. I lay there listening for his footsteps, waiting for the crunch of leaves to return. But the forest stayed silent. 5 minutes passed. 10. My unease curdled into dread. "Nathan?" I called softly, then louder. The woods absorbed my voice like a sponge, throwing nothing back. I crawled out of the tent, fire embers glowing faintly, and shined my own light into the black wall of trees. Nothing, just an endless curtain of branches swaying gently, though I felt no breeze. An hour passed with me circling the camp, calling until my throat was raw. No footprints, no reply. The only sign was his flashlight, half buried in the dirt at the edge of the clearing, its beam aimed back toward the tent, as though it had been dropped while he was running away. By dawn, panic had set in. I scoured the woods in every direction, stumbling over roots, tearing through brambles, desperate to find him. But the deeper I went, the more the trees seemed to repeat themselves, each bend of trail identical to the last. Exhausted and trembling, I returned to camp as the sun slipped low again. The shadows stretched long, clawing across the clearing, and despair settled in my gut. I was alone. My brother was gone. I dropped beside the fire pit, head in my hands, when the sound of footsteps crunched behind me. Slow, steady, familiar. I spun around. Nathan was there, standing just beyond the firelight, but something in my chest tightened. Because though it wore my brother's face, smiling faintly as if nothing had happened, his eyes weren't Nathan's anymore. Relief flooded me so hard I nearly collapsed. "Nathan!" I stumbled toward him but stopped short. Something wasn't right. His clothes were torn, smeared with dirt and streaks of dark stains that didn't look like mud. His face was pale, lips dry and cracked, his movements stiff, mechanical. Still, he smiled, though it was too slow, too deliberate. Like he had to remember how. "I got lost," he said flatly. The words sounded normal, but the tone didn't. It was flat, hollow, like a recording played a fraction too slow. My skin prickled, but I swallowed my fear and forced a nod. I asked him where he had been, if he was hurt. His responses came clipped, each one nearly identical. "I got lost. I'm fine." I came back. That evening I tried handing him a can of beans we had left over. He didn't eat. He just stared at the fire, his hands trembling in his lap. The flames reflected in his eyes, but there was no warmth behind them. I told myself exhaustion was making me paranoid. He had been out in the woods all night. Of course he'd act strange. But then I noticed the details. The way he didn't blink often enough. The way his breathing came too shallow. The way he smiled at the wrong moments, as if mimicking a memory of being human. I barely slept. Every snap of a twig made my chest tighten. Every rustle of leaves outside the tent felt like something circling us. At some point, exhaustion dragged me under. When I woke, he was standing over me. His silhouette loomed in the thin light of the dying fire, his head tilted slightly, watching. His breathing rasped, shallow but steady. I pretended to still be asleep, barely daring to move, my heart pounding in my throat. That was when he leaned down close. So close his cracked lips nearly brushed my ear. "You should have followed me," he whispered. The voice wasn't Nathan's. It wasn't even human. It was low, jagged, like something speaking through broken glass. I kept my eyes shut, my body frozen, until I heard him shift away. Only then did I allow a single tear to slip down my cheek, silently as I realized whatever had come back to camp with me wasn't my brother. By morning, I had made up my mind. Whatever that thing was, I couldn't stay another night with it. My plan was simple: pack what I could, head east until I found a road or river, and never look back. But the forest had other plans. I left at first light, telling Nathan I was just going to scout the trail. He nodded, his face blank, his eyes following me too intently. I walked fast, my boots crunching the soil, but every path bled into another. The landmarks repeated: the fallen log, the split birch, the patch of ferns. My compass spun wildly, the needle twitching as if repelled by the air itself. Then I heard it, humming, a faint tune drifting between the trees. It was the same song Nathan had hummed the day before we set up camp, the same song from our childhood road trips. My stomach knotted. I turned slowly, and there he was, just a few paces behind me. I hadn't heard him approach. He was smiling, lips cracked, teeth showing too many in the half-light. His head tilted at a strange angle as he swayed gently to the rhythm. I ran. Branches tore at my face, my pack slamming against my back. No matter how far I pushed, no matter how fast, he was always there, sometimes behind me, sometimes waiting ahead, always humming that broken, warped tune. By nightfall, I was back at camp. The fire pit, the tent, the circle of trees. No escape. I built the biggest fire I could, feeding it with everything. Branches, my spare clothes, even Nathan's abandoned pack. Flames roared high, spitting sparks into the canopy. I prayed light would keep him back, but light only revealed the truth. In the glow of the fire, I saw them. Dozens of shapes standing in the tree line. Pale faces, slack mouths, bodies thin and gray. Some wore tattered clothes, others none at all. Their eyes reflected the fire like glass marbles, unblinking, fixed on me. And among them was him. My brother's shape, smiling wider now, his humming growing louder. The others joined in. A low, guttural chorus of broken voices, humming in unison, drowning out the crackle of the flames. The melody twisted into something alien, vibrating in my bones. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it seeped through inside me. My vision blurred. My body grew heavy. The last thing I remember was collapsing by the fire, the chorus swelling, the forest closing in. I woke on the edge of a dirt road, sunlight burning my face. A ranger's truck idled nearby, two men pulling me up, asking what had happened. There was no camp behind me. No fire pit, no tent, no Nathan. I told them the truth, but they only exchanged looks. One muttered about dehydration, hallucinations, but I know what I saw, what I heard. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still hear that tune, low, broken, calling me back. And in those moments, I wonder if it's really Nathan, or if it's just the thing that came back wearing his skin. The ranger station was the last place that felt normal. It was a squat log cabin set against the endless sprawl of pines, its roof heavy with moss and its windows yellow with the glow of lanterns. I only meant to stop in for a trail map, maybe ask about the weather, but the man behind the counter leaned forward like he had been waiting for me specifically. His face was carved by time, lined deep from sun and wind, his uniform faded, his badge scratched nearly blank. Yet his eyes were sharp as glass. "You hiking in?" he asked. I nodded, sliding the form across the counter. "Just a few nights. Thought I'd camp near the lake." He studied me for a long moment, then lowered his voice. "Don't go past mile marker 7. I blinked. "Why?" His jaw clenched. "People don't come back from there." The way he said it, it wasn't playful. Not like a local trying to scare a tourist. It was flat, cold, the way you warn someone about a rattlesnake curled under their boot. I laughed it off anyway. Too stubborn, too eager. Some part of me liked the idea of pushing past where others wouldn't. I told him thanks, folded the map, and left without another word. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sun was bleeding orange through the treetops. The forest swallowed the last signs of the road within minutes, my boots sinking into the kind of soil that smelled alive, wet, black and thick with pine needles. For the first several miles, everything felt as it should. Birds darted overhead, squirrels scurried. The rhythmic crunch of my steps was oddly soothing. Then, without warning, I passed the sign. Mile 7, it was nothing special. Just a wooden post, old and splintered. A number burned into its surface. Yet the forest changed past it. The light dimmed, though the sun was still up. The air grew heavy, a weight pressing against my chest. I set up camp anyway, too tired to keep going, too stubborn to admit the ranger's warning had gotten under my skin. My fire fought me, sputtering no matter how much wood I fed it. The flames burned low, weak, as if the forest itself resented the light. Night fell fast, suffocating, the kind of darkness that feels thicker than air. I expected crickets, owls, something, but there was nothing. No sound at all, just silence. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the crunch of footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. They circled my tent once, twice, 3 times. I held my breath, heart slamming in my ears, waiting for the zipper to rip open. Then silence. Minutes stretched into hours before I dared to move. I finally unzipped the flap just enough to peer outside. The clearing was empty. The trees stood still. But on the ground leading back into the woods were footprints, not animal tracks. Human, bare, wet, and there were only 2. One left, one right, as though someone had walked out of the forest barefoot, circled me in the dark, and vanished. The fire sputtered, hissed, and went out. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. I barely slept. Every time my eyelids drooped, I saw the footprints burned into the soil outside my tent. By morning, the dew had blurred them, but they hadn't disappeared. The shapes were still there. Bare toes pressed deep into the dirt as though whoever left them had been heavy, impossibly heavy, like their body wasn't made for walking lightly. I should have packed up. Should have turned back to the ranger station. His words echoed in my skull. People don't come back from there. But some part of me, the same part that had laughed in his face, refused to leave. I told myself I was just spooked, that the silence, the forest, and the ranger's warning had wound me up too tight. I told myself the footprints had a simple explanation. Maybe another camper, a lost hiker. So I went deeper. The forest changed in ways I couldn't explain. Trees leaned over the trail at strange angles. Their trunks twisted like rope. The air was thicker, damp, carrying the copper tang of blood and the sweet sour rot of something long dead. Sunlight barely reached the ground. By late afternoon, I had gone too far to turn back without losing daylight. My legs ached. My pack cut into my shoulders. I found a clearing and set up camp again, even though the silence gnawed at me. When night came, I tried to prepare myself. I kept my flashlight within reach. I gripped a hatchet in one hand as I lay in the tent. My fire was nothing more than embers, dim and weak, but it was all I could manage. That's when I heard it again. The footsteps. They didn't circle this time. They approached. Slow, deliberate, heavy, crunching pine needles pressing down the earth. I froze. The sound came closer until it was right outside my tent. The nylon shifted as something brushed against it, dragging a hand or claws across the fabric. Then came the voice. It whispered my name. Not once. Not twice. Over and over. The voice was wrong, layered, broken, like several people speaking in unison but slightly out of sync. I snapped. With a scream, I unzipped the flap and lunged out with the flashlight, beam slicing the dark. Nothing. The forest was empty. The beam hit the trees, pale and endless, but there was no one. My breath poured white in the cold, though the air wasn't cold enough for frost. Then I looked down. The footprints were back. Dozens of them. Some small, some large, pressed deep into the soil around my camp. Bare. Human. They circled my tent, my fire pit, my pack. They overlapped until the dirt was almost black with impressions. And they all led to the same spot, right to where I stood. But none led away. It was as if they had gathered here, surrounded me, watched, and then vanished into the dark without moving an inch. A sudden gust of wind snuffed out the last of the embers, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't afraid of being alone out there. I was afraid that I never had been. I didn't wait for sunrise. The second the whispers stopped, the second the footsteps faded into nothing, I stuffed my gear into my pack and began walking. My flashlight beam jittered across the path, bouncing off twisted trunks and gnarled roots, but the trail refused to make sense. Every few minutes, I'd swear I was moving forward, only to stumble into the same crooked pine, the same rotten log, the same bent tree. I was trapped in some kind of loop. My throat was raw from shouting, but my voice was swallowed whole by the forest. No echo, just silence, heavy and suffocating. At some point, I stopped walking. My body felt drained, like every step took something from me. My legs trembled. My pack dragged me down like lead. I leaned against a tree, but the bark felt wet, slimy, as if it was breathing. And then I saw it. A clearing opened ahead, pale light spilling into it like a stage. In the center stood an old weathered post, its wood split and gray with age. The number burned into it was faint but unmistakable. 7, but the marker was facing the wrong way. It wasn't set for travelers entering the forest. It was turned inward, like it was meant for those already lost inside. The whispers started again, low and guttural, crawling from the shadows between the trees. Shapes emerged, thin, pale figures with skin stretched tight over their bones. Their eyes were pits of black, hollow and endless, their mouths twitching into crooked smiles. They stepped closer, movements jerky, unnatural, like marionettes tugged by invisible strings. And they spoke. "Stay with us." Their voices overlapped, broken, hundreds of whispers layered into one, filling the air until it felt thick enough to choke me. I bolted, My legs carried me through the brush, tearing skin, ripping fabric, every step fueled by panic. I didn't care where I went, I just needed to move. Branches whipped my face, roots snagged my boots, but I kept going until the world blurred into streaks of dark and pale, and then blackness. When I woke, I was lying on a hard bench, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. My throat burned. My clothes were shredded, my arms and legs covered in cuts I couldn't remember getting. The smell of antiseptic replaced the stink of rot. I was back at the ranger station. The old ranger stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face grim. His eyes didn't look surprised. "You made it out," he said quietly. I tried to explain, the voices, the figures, the footprints, but my words came out broken, hysterical. He didn't interrupt. He just shook his head slowly, like someone watching a car crash they couldn't stop. Finally, he muttered, "We told you. Mile marker 7 doesn't let go." His voice carried no satisfaction, no anger, only pity. And in that moment, I realized something worse than all the rest. I hadn't escaped, I'd only been released for now. I never planned to spend that summer in the Black Hills. Camping wasn't my thing anymore. I'd grown out of it after college, traded tents and bug spray for air conditioning and quiet nights at home. But when my old roommate Mark called, his voice was full of nostalgia, pulling me back into the reckless comfort of our early 20s. "Come on," he said, "one weekend. Just like old times. No phones, no stress, no noise." I hesitated, but the truth was I was exhausted. Life had dulled into routine, and part of me longed for something different. That's how Mark convinced me. That's how I ended up driving west with him, deeper into South Dakota, toward the jagged silhouette of the Black Hills National Forest. The further we drove, the quieter the world became. Cell service died first, then the hum of towns and highways. All that remained was the crunch of tires on gravel roads and the endless stretch of darkening trees. Pines leaned in on both sides, their branches forming an oppressive canopy. We finally stopped at a ranger checkpoint. An older man in a faded green uniform leaned against the shack, staring at us with a look I couldn't read. His name tag was scratched, but I caught the first letters, Hal. Mark waved cheerfully. "Evening, Ranger?" The man didn't wave back. He studied us like we were already lost. "You boys camping out here tonight?" "Yeah," Mark said. "Couple nights. Site 42. The ranger nodded, but his face didn't soften. "Stay in your sight after dark," he said flatly. "No wandering." "Not out here. Not at night." Mark chuckled, trying to cut the tension. "Bears, huh?" The ranger's eyes didn't move. "Not bears." Then he pushed himself off the shack and walked away without another word. The silence in the car afterward was heavier than the forest. I tried to laugh it off, but the unease burrowed under my skin. By the time we reached the campsite, the sky was bruised purple. We hurried to set up tents before it got too dark. Mark kept cracking jokes, telling stories about our college days, but his voice carried strangely in the stillness. No owls, no insects, no rustling, just us disturbing a silence that felt deliberate. Later we lit a fire. Sparks jumped into the black sky, and for a while it felt normal. Beer in hand, the warmth of flames, the comfort of old friendship. But every now and then, I'd glance past the firelight into the trees. The shadows there seemed thicker than they should have been, the pines crowding closer as though listening. Around midnight, we crawled into our tents. The fire had died to a faint orange glow. I lay awake, staring at the nylon ceiling above me, struggling to ignore the suffocating quiet. Then I heard it. A faint crunch. Leaves, maybe. Branches breaking. Something moving. I held my breath. It came again, circling slowly around the campsite. I whispered, "Mark." He groaned from the other tent, half asleep. "What? Do you hear that?" "Probably a deer," he mumbled. Within seconds, his breathing deepened again. But I knew it wasn't a deer. The sound wasn't scattered or frantic, it was steady. Deliberate, 2 feet, human. The steps circled once, twice, and then stopped. I stayed frozen in my sleeping bag, listening to the silence press in. Minutes stretched. The forest held its breath, and then, just as my eyelids grew heavy, I heard it again. Closer this time. A single step. Right outside my tent. The nylon rippled softly, as though someone's hand had brushed against it. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the faint curve of fabric in the dark, waiting for the zipper to slide open. But it never did. Not that night. When I woke the next morning, the forest looked harmless. Sunlight spilled through the canopy, glinting off the dew, painting everything gold and green. For a while, I convinced myself the footsteps had been nothing more than an overactive imagination, fueled by firelight and shadows. Mark emerged from his tent yawning, scratching his head like nothing was wrong. He joked about how I looked like I hadn't slept, but I didn't tell him the truth. Some things sound ridiculous in daylight. We boiled coffee over the fire and planned out a hike. The trail we picked cut deep into the forest, winding through towering pines that looked like cathedral pillars. At first it was almost peaceful, almost, but then we noticed the prints. Not far from camp, half buried in the soil, were clear impressions. Boots. Not fresh, but not old either. The stride was long, the heel marks sharp, and they circled the camp, looping right past our tents. I locked eyes with Mark. "Other campers?" I asked. He shook his head. Site 42's the last marked spot for miles. We left the prints behind, but I couldn't shake the thought that someone had stood just outside my tent, watching. Hours into the hike, the air grew heavy. The deeper we went, the quieter the forest became. I don't mean peaceful quiet. I mean wrong quiet. The kind that feels like the earth itself is holding back a secret. Even the wind seemed to avoid the trees. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Between two pines, maybe 50 yards away, stood a shape. Tall. Too tall. It didn't move, didn't shift. Just stood there, angled slightly as though watching us. I froze mid-step. "What?" Mark asked. When I looked again, the space between the trees was empty. Nothing but shadows. "Nothing," I muttered, but my voice cracked. By late afternoon, we were ready to turn back. That's when we heard it, a whistle. Soft at first, then sharper. A tune like someone calling a dog or luring a child. The sound didn't echo the way it should, it followed. Every time we stopped, it stopped. Every time we walked, it picked up again, trailing us. Mark forced a laugh. Probably another hiker messing with us. But his grip on the walking stick had whitened his knuckles. We hurried back to camp. Dusk fell fast in the black hills. Shadows stretched long, swallowing the firelight as we built it back up. I tried to joke, tried to drink enough to relax, but the sound of the forest felt alive, like it was listening. When we crawled into our tents, I told myself I'd sleep. I told myself nothing would happen, but sometime after midnight I felt it again. The nylon of the tent brushed against my cheek, soft at first, like a fingertip tracing the fabric. I held my breath. The brushing turned into a slow drag, circling the tent wall, gliding from one side to the other. Something was moving outside, tracing us like it could sense where we lay. Mark whispered through the dark. "You hear that?" His voice was tight now, stripped of humor. The brushing stopped. Silence. Then, the zipper. It trembled. Not sliding open, not yet, just a soft, careful tug. Testing it. I grabbed my flashlight with shaking hands, snapped it on, and shone the beam straight at the tent wall. Nothing. The sound was gone. The night was still. But I couldn't shake the image in my mind. Fingers. Cold, patient fingers resting on the zipper, waiting for me to fall asleep again. We didn't last another night. By morning, both of us looked wrecked. Eyes bloodshot, nerves fried. Mark tried to laugh it off while breaking down his tent, but the sound cracked, brittle and strained. Neither of us mentioned the zipper. We didn't have to. The forest seemed different that day. The sunlight felt thinner, washed out, as if the woods themselves wanted us gone. Every step back toward the car seemed to drag, but the footsteps didn't stop. They started faint like before, pacing just behind us, matching our rhythm. Whenever we turned, there was nothing, just the pines, standing silent and endless. Yet the crunch of leaves always returned, steady, deliberate, patient. Mark snapped finally, spinning around and shouting, "Who's there?" His voice echoed uselessly through the trees. Nothing answered, but in that echo, I swore I heard something else. Something low, almost like laughter carried on the wind. By the time we reached the trailhead, I was shaking. The car never looked so welcoming. We loaded our gear in silence, slammed the doors shut, and peeled out, gravel spraying behind us. The woods shrank in the rearview mirror, but the dread didn't leave. I thought the feeling would fade once I got home. It didn't. The first week back, it was little things, strange dreams, the sensation of being watched in my own house. My dog barked at the back door every night. Hackles raised, but when I looked outside, there was nothing. Nothing but the line of trees beyond the yard, dark and waiting. Then the footsteps returned. On the porch. On the gravel driveway. Always at night. Always circling. Just like in the Black Hills. I'd fling the door open, flashlight in hand, but there was never anyone there. Only silence. Only shadows. The worst was the glass. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered to the sliding door in the kitchen. The moon was bright, casting pale light over the yard. For a moment, I thought I saw movement in the tree line. Something tall, still, watching. And then I saw it reflected in the glass. A figure. Too close, too tall. Standing just behind me where no one should have been. I spun around, heart hammering, but the kitchen was empty. The air felt colder, though. Heavy with the same silence I'd felt in the forest. I don't go camping anymore. I don't even walk near the woods. But it doesn't matter. Whatever was out there, it didn't stay behind. It followed me home. And some nights, when I wake up to the sound of careful, deliberate footsteps circling my house, I realize it's still here, waiting, watching. The storm came without warning. 1 minute, the forest was calm, sunlight streaming through the canopy, birdsong drifting in the air, and the next, clouds boiled over the mountains like smoke. The first crack of thunder made us jump. By the time the second rolled across the valley, the sky had opened. Rain hammered the earth in sheets so heavy it blurred the trees into gray shadows. Wind howled between the pines, bending them until they looked ready to snap. The trail turned into a stream beneath our boots. Mud sucking at every step. We needed shelter. Fast. That was when Alex spotted it. A dark split in the cliffside, half hidden behind curtains of moss and slick stone. A cave. Perfect, he shouted over the storm, already climbing toward it. We followed, dragging our packs soaked to the bone. The moment we stepped inside, relief washed over us. It was dry, spacious enough for all four of us. The storm outside roared on, but inside the cave it was muffled, like the walls themselves were swallowing the sound. We dropped our gear, wrung out our clothes, and built a small fire near the entrance. The flames hissed as steam rose from our jackets, laughter finally breaking through as the tension drained from our bodies. It felt like a miracle. Exactly what we needed, exactly when we needed it. But I noticed it almost immediately. The smell. Not the earthy damp of stone or the smoke of the fire, but something fouler. A stench like wet fur left to rot. Metallic, sharp, the stink of iron and blood. I tried to ignore it. Told myself it was just animal musk or maybe something dead deeper in the cave. But then I saw the bones. At first I thought they were sticks scattered across the floor. Then the firelight caught the pale curve of them. And I realized, tiny skulls, rib cages the size of my hand, rodents, birds, piles of them tucked neatly into the corners like offerings, and then bigger ones, a deer's jaw, something that looked like the shattered remains of a fox. I glanced at Alex, but he only shrugged. Predator's den. Nothing's here now. We'll be fine. The others nodded, eager to believe it, but the way the bones were arranged, the neatness of them, the almost deliberate stacks made my skin crawl. We tried to sleep, curled up near the fire. At some point in the night I woke. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows that swayed across the cave walls. I lay still, listening to the storm outside. The wind shrieked, water pounded the rocks, and beneath it, from deeper in the cave, I heard something else. Not dripping water, not shifting stone, breathing, slow, heavy, deliberate. Something was back there, waiting. I froze. The sound was faint but undeniable. Air moving in and out of something massive. The rhythm of lungs. The sound of life where no life should have been. I told myself it was the storm. Just the wind funneled through cracks in the rock. But the longer I lay there, the clearer it became. The breaths weren't random. They were steady. Too steady. I glanced at my friends. Alex and Jordan were asleep, mouths open, faces slack in the dying glow of the fire. Mia was curled up tightly, twitching as if she were trapped in a dream. None of them stirred. None of them heard. So I stayed awake, listening. The breaths grew closer. At least that's how it felt, like whatever was hiding in the blackness of the cave was shifting forward inch by inch, testing the air. My skin prickled. I wanted to wake the others, to shout, to grab my pack and run into the storm. But I couldn't move. Then the fire sputtered. For a heartbeat, the cave was swallowed in pitch darkness, until the embers flared again. Just enough light to reveal the tunnel leading deeper inside. And that's when I saw them. 2 points of white. Not glowing exactly, but catching what little light existed. Perfectly round, perfectly still. Eyes. I blinked and they were gone. My heart hammered. I must have imagined it. Just firelight bouncing off stone. Just my mind making monsters where none existed. But then came the sound. A scrape, like claws dragging over rock. Slow, measured, intentional. The storm roared louder, the cave rattling with thunder. My friends stirred but didn't wake. I wanted to scream at them, to shake them, but before I could, the scraping stopped. Silence. And then something worse. A laugh. Not human. Not animal. A broken, breathy wheeze that echoed through the stone until I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It was the kind of sound you don't forget because it doesn't belong in this world. I clamped my hand over my mouth. My body was trembling so hard I thought the thing would hear my bones knocking together. Minutes dragged by. Maybe hours. The storm began to fade, the rain turning to drizzle, thunder rolling off into the distance. When morning finally came, sunlight cut across the cave entrance, painting the walls in pale gold. The fire had long since died. My friends stretched and groaned, oblivious, yawning like it had been an ordinary night. But I hadn't slept. I couldn't. When I told them what I'd heard, Alex only smirked. Dreams. You freak yourself out too easily. Jordan laughed, tossing me a granola bar. Yeah, man, caves make weird noises, echoes, bats, whatever. Mia looked at me differently, though. She didn't laugh. She didn't mock. She just asked, "Where exactly did you see the eyes?" I pointed to the dark tunnel leading further inside. She nodded once quietly and said nothing more. We should have left. We should have packed our bags that very moment and never looked back. But Alex wanted to stay until the storm cleared completely. He insisted on exploring deeper into the cave just to see what was back there. And when he lit his flashlight and shone it into the tunnel, the beam didn't reach the end. The darkness swallowed it whole, still he grinned. Come on, guys, let's check it out. And against every instinct screaming inside me, we followed him. The tunnel swallowed us whole. Our flashlights cut pale cones through the black, but the walls seemed to lean closer the farther we went. The air growing heavy, thick, damp. Every step echoed too loud, bouncing back at us in strange distortions, as if something else were walking alongside us. A half step behind. The deeper we went, the stronger the stench became. Metallic, rotten. My stomach turned with each breath, my tongue tasting the copper tang of blood. Bones littered the ground in clusters, not scattered like scraps left behind, but arranged. Spirals, circles, neat rows like someone had placed them carefully. The farther we went, the larger they became. A bird here, a raccoon there, then deer, and then something human, a femur. A cracked skull with jagged teeth marks punched into the bone. I stopped cold. We need to go back. Alex laughed, though it sounded hollow. It's just old. Probably hunters. Maybe the sound cut him off, that laugh again. That wheezing, broken cackle rising from the dark ahead. Mia grabbed my arm. Jordan swore under his breath. Alex raised his flashlight, his grin faltering as the beam quivered in his hand. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. But then I saw it move. Something crouched at the end of the tunnel, pale and long-limbed. Its body twisted into shapes that didn't make sense. The skin looked stretched too thin, clinging to bone. And those eyes, the hollow white discs, locked onto us. It didn't lunge, not yet. It just stood there, watching, breathing, then, impossibly, it spoke. You stayed. The voice rattled through the cave like stone grinding against stone. We bolted. Panic overtook reason. Our flashlights jerked wildly as we sprinted, tripping over rocks and bones. The tunnel seemed endless, as if it were stretching while we ran. Behind us, claws scraped against stone, fast and furious now, closing in. Something slammed into the wall just behind me. A shriek tore through the darkness, so loud I thought my ears would burst. We burst into the main chamber, daylight spilling through the cave mouth. The thing stopped short of the fire pit, lingering in the shadows like it couldn't cross into the light. For a moment, all I saw was its silhouette, taller than any of us. Its head cocked at an unnatural angle, limbs too long, too thin. Its eyes gleamed once more before it slunk back into the black. We didn't wait. We didn't breathe. We ran straight into the storm, slipping through mud and stone, never daring to look back. Even when the rain cleared and the sun burned away the mist, we didn't stop. Not until we reached the ranger station, gasping, soaked, wild-eyed. The ranger listened, his face grim. When we finished, he only shook his head. "You should have never gone into the caves," he said quietly. "Locals don't go near them." "Not since the disappearances. What was it?" I demanded. He didn't answer. He just stared out the window at the mountains, jaw tight, eyes distant. Finally, he whispered, almost to himself, "It doesn't like when people stay." That night, I tried to sleep in a real bed, safe inside four walls. But when I closed my eyes, I saw them again. Those hollow, unblinking eyes gleaming from the dark. And sometimes, when the night is quiet, I still hear it breathing, still waiting. The air was sharp that morning, cool enough that my breath lingered in the shafts of light spilling through the pine canopy. I had come out here for solitude, away from the endless drone of screens and concrete. Just me, the forest, and the crunch of soil under my boots. My two friends were still back at camp by the lake, probably nursing coffee and complaining about the cold, while I slipped off alone with the excuse of just a short hike. But there was no such thing as short in these woods. The trail twisted, through the trees like veins, each path looking nearly identical. I trusted the faded blazes on the trunks, splashes of orange that were supposed to keep me from drifting too far. But somewhere along the way I missed one, or maybe there wasn't one to begin with. The forest changed subtly, but enough for me to notice. The air grew heavier, quieter. Birdsong faded until only the creak of my pack straps kept me company. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS app, and the little blue dot spun in lazy circles, refusing to anchor itself. The compass function glitched too, flickering east to west to nowhere. I told myself it was fine. I'd just backtrack. Except every landmark I thought I remembered, the birch tree split down the middle, the slope of moss-covered stone, was gone. Or worse, repeated. I walked in a loop without realizing it, until panic tickled the back of my throat. That was when I saw it. Through a break in the pines, a small clearing opened up, lit by an anemic wash of afternoon light. In the center stood a cabin. It leaned slightly as if the earth beneath it had shifted. The wood looked burned in places, blackened along the edges like it had survived a fire long ago. No smoke curled from a chimney. No path led to its door. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed it whole and forgotten it. I froze, a rush of cold crawling down my spine. This wasn't supposed to be here. I had checked the maps before leaving. Nearest structure was miles away, an old ranger station on the opposite side of the park. This cabin wasn't listed anywhere. Still, curiosity dragged me forward. Each step through the clearing felt wrong, like I was intruding on something sacred, or cursed. The air was colder near the door, the shadows sharper. The windows were black with dirt. But I thought I saw movement inside, a shift, a flicker. I should have turned back right there, but I didn't. I reached the door and pressed my palm against it. The wood was damp and soft, spongy with rot. I only meant to test it, but the hinges gave with a drawn-out groan, and the door swung inward like it had been waiting. The smell hit first. Wet earth. Mold. The stench of something old and decaying. Inside, the light was dim. A single wooden chair faced the doorway, positioned as though someone had been sitting and watching the entrance. Dust coated everything, but the floorboards looked oddly clear, as if they'd been disturbed recently. On the far wall, deep scratches gouged into the wood spelled something, letters jagged and uneven. I squinted, but the word made no sense, an arrangement that felt wrong in my mouth when I tried to whisper it. Behind me, the forest had gone silent. Not a bird, not a breeze. And then, with no hand on it, the door began to close. The sound of the hinge creaking shut echoed through the cabin, drowning out the thundering of my heart. I spun, reaching out to stop it, but froze halfway. Because, in the reflection of the dirty window, I thought I saw something standing just behind me. Something tall, something waiting. And then the door slammed shut. The slam rattled the walls, dust falling like ash from the rafters. My instinct was to laugh it off, to tell myself it was the wind. But the air inside was too still, thick, stagnant, as though the cabin had been sealed for decades. I pressed the door again, expecting resistance, but it creaked open easily under my hand, swinging wide to the clearing outside. Relief washed over me, though it was short-lived. The forest beyond looked different. The trees leaned closer, their branches knitted tighter, strangling the daylight. I shut the door again, half hoping it was all in my head. That's when I noticed the details. The cabin was small, barely larger than a shed, yet its walls held too much. On a table, mason jars filled with cloudy liquid caught the weak light. Shapes floated inside them, twisted, unidentifiable, some with what looked disturbingly like teeth. Against the far wall lay a child's shoe, its laces frayed, buried halfway in dust as though someone had dropped it years ago. But the mirror is what froze me. It leaned crooked against the wall, its glass warped and cloudy. I moved, raising my flashlight, and my reflection lagged half a second behind. A trick of light, I told myself. Old glass warps images, except shadows moved in it differently, stretched, wrong. As night bled across the clearing, the silence thickened. I knew I should leave, but the forest outside had begun to feel hostile, and my legs ached from hours of wandering. Against my better judgment, I decided to stay inside. I lit my small stove. The hiss and flicker of the flame, a fragile comfort in the suffocating gloom. The firelight reached across the walls, and that's when the scratches became clearer. Not just one word, dozens of them. Carvings layered on carvings, shapes gouged over letters until the surface was a chaotic tapestry of obsession. Stick figures marched across the wood, some neatly drawn, others frenzied. A few were crossed out, heads scratched away violently. Others were grotesquely altered, limbs stretched too long, fingers splayed like claws. Every single one faced the chair. By midnight, the forest stirred again. It began as a soft pacing across the porch, measured, deliberate. Then a drag, like something heavy scraped the wood. I froze, holding my breath, watching the doorknob tremble. Then, clear as breath against my ear, came a whisper. "Go back." I swung the flashlight toward the door, the beam catching on the edge of the mirror. My stomach dropped, because in that warped reflection something stood behind me. It was tall, gray, faceless. Its body filled the frame, shoulders bent to fit beneath the cabin's low ceiling. I spun around, heart hammering, and the room was empty. No one there, but the whisper returned, closer this time, as if it had slid into the cabin with me. "Go back." The mirror shivered, just slightly, as though something inside had pressed against the glass. By dawn, I was unraveling. My nerves were frayed. My body stiff from hours of sitting in the corner with my back against the wall, stove long extinguished. The first gray wash of daylight slipped through the cracks in the wood, but it brought no comfort. I had survived the night, but the cabin wasn't finished with me. I forced myself outside, lungs aching for clean air. The forest was damp and heavy with fog. I picked a direction and walked, legs trembling, swearing I wouldn't stop until I found a trail marker, a stream, anything. But the trees blurred together. The pines grew denser, weaving into an endless wall. After what felt like an hour, a familiar roofline appeared through the haze. The cabin. I stood there shaking, my throat tight. I walked farther this time, pushing until sweat soaked my shirt, until my boots tore through roots and brambles. But every path wound back to that clearing, as if the forest itself turned me around, dragging me back to its centerpiece. When I re-entered the cabin, my breath caught. The wall carvings had changed. Among the endless figures, one was fresh. A smaller stick figure, with a circle for a head, and a crude line of a backpack slung over its shoulders. My stomach dropped. It was me. I tried barricading the door with the chair, dragging the table against it, anything. But night fell again, quick and suffocating. Shadows oozed across the floor, thin black veins stretching toward me. The mirror pulsed with movement, and I realized the figures weren't carvings at all. They were instructions, records. Each stick figure a visitor who never left. I dared a glance at the mirror. Dozens of shapes pressed against the glass from the other side. Men, women, children. Their faces melted away, bodies slack and gray. They crowded against the surface like moths to a flame. The glass bowed inward as though it was softening, ready to break. That's when I ran. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I hurled myself into the night, through branches that tore at my skin, through roots that snatched my boots. I ran until my lungs burned and the blackness in my vision threatened to swallow me whole. The forest twisted, but I didn't stop. At some point, exhaustion took me. I collapsed in a ditch, staring up at the stars that swam above me, bright and cruel. My last thought before the dark took me was that the forest had finally decided to spit me out. I woke 2 days later on a ranger's trail, dehydrated, mud-caked, my lips cracked, my body sore. The rangers who found me asked where I'd been. When I told them, their faces shifted a polite, uneasy disbelief. "No cabin exists out there," one said firmly. "Not for miles. But I know what I saw. I can still smell the rot of its walls, feel the whispers in my ear when the night falls too quiet. And sometimes when I pass a dark window or catch my reflection in a pane of glass, I see it. That door, half open, waiting." And so we return to the question that opened this file. What follows you back when the forest should have let you go? The answer, buried in these true camping horror stories, is chillingly clear. Sometimes it's not just memories that leave the woods with you. Sometimes it's something that waits, unseen, until you're far from the safety of the firelight. Every campsite, every trail, every lonely clearing carries its own shadow. Survivors speak of footsteps in the night, whispers in the trees, and the dreadful sense that the wilderness doesn't always stay behind once you pack up. These are the most disturbing camping horror stories because they remind us that the wilderness never forgets. And it never truly lets go. But what if the next time you leave the woods, something decides to leave with you? Make sure to subscribe to Midnight Murmurs for more true horror stories that were never meant to be heard. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done if this happened to you?